I would like to welcome up Honorable Mr. Rodney Hood. This event was actually inspired. We connected and he said, I would like to convey that this market should be for credit unions and community banks. Thank you for your leadership. Thank you for being here and your enthusiasm, your forethought. So come on up, please.
Great, thank you. Thank you so much. Thank you. Thank you, thank you, thank you. How is the sound quality? Can you hear me back there? Very well. First and foremost, Kirsten, thank you for your leadership. Thank you for the energy that you give to this thought-provoking issue each and every single day. Ladies and gentlemen, who would have thought that years ago that I would be standing before you celebrating and talking about issues regarding regulation at an Out of the Weeds event? So I am thrilled to be here. I'm thrilled also to let you all know of the role that I think credit unions can play in this wonderful burgeoning industry. As Kirsten mentioned, yes, I'm with the National Credit Union Administration. Pardon me, I'm going to get a little water. It gets choked up when I think about what I do during the day. I am with the National Credit Union Administration, and probably with the exception of the folks from ABA, many of you others may not encounter us very often. We are the regulatory agency for America's credit union system. So we regulate and we also insure those institutions' deposits. And we have several thousand credit unions throughout the country. And I'll talk a little bit more about their role in the midst of my comments, but I just wanted to let you know that I am a financial regulator, but one that certainly believes in the important role that cannabis-related businesses can play in stimulating our economy. And I also recognize the important role that credit unions can play in giving them the access to affordable financial services. When it comes to talking about NCUA, you all, this is in fact my second tour of duty there on the NCUA board. I served years ago as vice chairman. I came back as the 11th chairman in 2019, and now I'm pleased to serve as a board member. But during both of my terms on that board, regulatory reform has been among my top priorities. I don't need to tell you, a group here in Washington, that regulation is vitally important for the safety, soundness, and integrity of our financial system, and to ensure consumer protection and public confidence. Regulatory reform is perfectly consonant with those goals. I've always believed that regulations, our system could and should be effective without being excessive and burdensome. That also means, ladies and gentlemen, that regulations need to change with the times, responding to shifts in market conditions, public demand, technology, and so forth. And so last August, when I spoke with many of you here in the room today at the Payments, Banking, and Compliance Conference, just a few steps from here, I urged federal action to normalize banking services for cannabis-related businesses. I was speaking from that perspective then as I am today, and that's the perspective of common sense regulatory reform in response to a rapidly evolving market reality. I emphasize that marijuana legalization is ultimately inevitable, and as such, we need to clarify and harmonize federal banking laws and regulations as they pertain to the state legal cannabis industry and marijuana-related businesses. I argued, and I believe that I may have staked out the clearest position on this question of any other federal financial regulator to date, and that is that the legal and regulatory infrastructure must evolve so this growing industry can take part in the mainstream financial services industry. I urged congressional action, which needs to happen sooner rather than later. That was sadly about 8 months ago, and we still haven't quite gotten the momentum I would like. I certainly would love to be able to stand before you today and say that, hey, tremendous results have taken place on this pressing issue, and we're well on our way to having a framework we can use to move forward. But unfortunately, I don't believe that's the case as we convene today, at least not yet. I admit that I, as someone who's pretty type A and take charge, I find that frustrating. And I imagine many of you share that same frustration. However, I continue to be optimistic about the potential for cannabis banking reform, and we can point toward a number of reassuring signs. For example, in February, we saw the House of Representatives pass the Secure and Fair Enforcement Banking Act, known as SAFE Banking, which could go a long way toward normalizing banking activities for cannabis businesses. I, frankly, as an independent regulator, I don't typically take positions on pending legislation, but the Safe Banking Act seems like a good place to start in addressing this problem. Yes, we know the House has moved on this legislation previously, and it hasn't yet passed the Senate. But let's be optimistic that further action may follow. Hope does, in fact, spring eternal. I also tell you that community of federal executive branch regulators here in this town, they are in fact taking this issue very seriously, as we all want to be prepared to act when Congress does pass some form of legislation. Now, I simply can't speak for the other financial regulatory agencies, but I can tell you that the National Credit Union Administration, NCUA, we have an internal working group focused on preparing for what we'll need to do to respond to what happens when we do get the legislation passed that we need. So know, ladies and gentlemen, that regulators are in fact working to prepare the ground for what does come eventually. Even if some of those efforts aren't entirely visible now, there is a lot of movement afoot. Moreover, we're seeing various state initiatives that are addressing the banking and tax status of cannabis businesses. For instance, just last month, lawmakers in New York introduced legislation to reform the state tax code to allow cannabis enterprises to deduct business expenses. Meanwhile, lawmakers in Pennsylvania and Washington state are also working on related issues. And I'm sure there are many other states out there that are being equally as creative. I'm not entirely satisfied, though, that the most constructive action seems to be happening at the state level. We need a federal solution rather than a patchwork of state reform measures. But lamentably, in the absence of congressional action, I'm pleased that these state officials are working to address this issue, and I commend them for their leadership and foresight. And we need, again, as I've said, a federal solution because the situation as it stands is untenable. Here we have a rising industry that is growing and will continue to grow. According to the most recent estimates I've seen, the cannabis business is expected to grow to $25 billion per year between now and 2025, and that is even without full legalization. And yet the basic commercial banking infrastructure needed to provide financial services to this rapidly growing industry is virtually non-existent. Just a few weeks ago, the Treasury Department's Financial Crimes Enforcement Network, or FinCEN, published their marijuana banking update. This report shows that as of September of last year, we have 535 banks and 202 credit unions providing services to marijuana-related businesses in accordance with the FinCEN's 2014 guidance. As you all are aware, those guidelines at this time provide the only legitimate way for cannabis businesses to secure depository accounts with financial institutions. Now, the good news is that the number of financial institutions working with marijuana-related businesses has in fact grown, if slowly. But let's put those numbers in context. My agency, the NCUA, we regulate and insure, I may have mentioned earlier, 5,000 credit unions that serve over 129 million members. Assets approximate $2.02 trillion. So let me see if I get this right. We have 5,000 credit unions, but only 202 of them are providing services to one of the fastest growing industries in the nation. So let's just say I think there's a lot of opportunity and room for growth. And those of you who are here today that are some of the third service providers, please know that I certainly look forward to working with you to understand what we can do at NCUA to help you address any of those regulatory impediments. While I'm here today to talk a bit about marijuana and cannabis-related businesses, one of the things that hasn't been discussed is that I'm also working around fintech. So I was very proud of the fact that you've done a lot of work at fintech. We are creating an Office of Innovation and Access to help spur greater opportunities for financial inclusion in our credit unions and opportunities to serve underserved communities. So to the degree that I can get together with those of you who are here as those credit union service providers, certainly we look forward to convening and doing a webinar or something like that. So as I mentioned, I'm not satisfied with the small number of credit unions that we have participating in the cannabis-related business. So that's why, again, I'm proud of the fact that EMC is hosting an event like today, because what we're going to need, you all, is ongoing communication between industry leaders, regulators, and other stakeholders to keep the momentum going. In the meantime, the NCUA is trying to offer as much helpful guidance as possible to the federally insured credit unions we oversee. We, ladies and gentlemen, make it clear that credit unions are welcome to serve cannabis and marijuana-related businesses, provided they are doing the appropriate due diligence, that they are observing all of the relevant KYC, knowing your customer guidelines, and following the BSA, the Bank Secrecy Act requirements, and that they are also adhering to the FinCEN guidance. We tell our institutions, if you follow these guidelines, we will work with you collaboratively and in partnership during the supervision and examination efforts of your exams. So again, we do not want them to be frightened about working in these legal business entities. Our team also has compiled a compendium of all the state laws related to cannabis and marijuana-related enterprises. Okay. I think everyone is sharing the excitement. So, again, I was just letting you know that we have compiled a compendium of all the state laws related to cannabis and marijuana enterprises so that our examiners can quickly refer to relevant state requirements in their interactions and dealings with credit unions. So again, you all, we are trying to offer our institutions as much clarity and direction as we can while we wait for definitive action from Congress. I'll note that NCUA does, in fact, have some solid background on issues related to cannabis banking. In fact, when I first became chair of the NCUA in 2019, one of the first items of my regulatory agenda was to help provide guidance around hemp. Hemp was something that we were hearing from a lot of our states that they needed us to give them some guidance. So I was able to work with them to give them that regulatory clarity, to give them the guide path so that they know that they can embrace hemp-related businesses. Now, as a federal regulator, I can tell them to do federal things such as hemp all the time. So that's why I'm yearning for the day that we can get cannabis with that same level of approval. But again, our credit unions have already been working diligently with hemp. I was able to also place an op-ed in several of the newspapers. So Kirsten, perhaps I can share some of that with you as to put out with the body of work that you've been disseminating with your folks here. And when we did you all that hemp guidance, and again, we were one of the first regulators to do such, we were wanting to make sure that we were not overly prescriptive or heavy-handed. We simply sought to provide credit unions the ability to test the waters and determine how best to serve this burgeoning industry until we had definitive regulatory guidance from the U.S. Department of Agriculture, which finally took place last year. I'm proud of the fact that we were able to take a leading role in setting standards and clarifying a forward direction, at least for the credit union industry. And I hope that we can continue to provide that level of leadership. But again, definitive legislative action from Congress on cannabis banking reform is sorely needed. And let's be clear, normalizing financial services is only one piece of the puzzle. There are a variety of other issues that will need to be addressed either by Congress or by executive branch regulators. There are going to be regulatory challenges related to FDA, the agricultural and environmental implications, the law enforcement and criminal justice side, and questions of equity to ensure that the industry is inclusive and all communities are benefiting in a fair and just fashion. Most of these issues are, quite frankly, outside my area of expertise and control. So, Kirsten, I'm hoping that you all here at EMC are all going to be working with regulators and policymakers and stakeholders to help address these myriad challenges that are here with us today. Frankly, though, I am in fact glad that I'm only working on the financial angle because that's probably the easiest piece of the equation to address. From the financial side, we're basically talking about handling deposits, clearing electronic transactions, and setting up the mechanisms for credit access and affordability. I don't need to tell all of you this, those of you who've worked in and around financial services for a while, you all, those tools are already in existence today. We just need to harness them to serve this burgeoning business. I recognize that I'm now making this sound terribly oversimplified, But I want to make it clear that our goal here is eminently achievable. There's a quote that I'd like to share from someone whom we recently lost here in Washington, and that is the late General Colin Powell, who said that, and I quote, "Leaders need to be simplifiers, people who are able to cut through the argument, debate, and doubt to offer a solution everybody can understand." And I end the quote. Well, in this case, I think we all understand the problem pretty clearly, as well as the solution. As a regulator, I'll do all I can, but we need a concerted push, which is why, again, I appreciate the work that the EMC group is doing to drive this issue. One additional reassuring sign that I now regularly hear about this issue from the financial industry leaders is this. I mentioned earlier, who would have thought that years ago that I would be speaking so enthusiastically at the Out of the Weeds conference, where you all now, when I go to events, whether it be with credit unions, and yes, ABA, I do get invited to a number of bank events and things of that nature. At the end of the day, a rising tide lifts all boats. People now are coming up to me saying, "Hey, I heard that you were talking a lot about cannabis. I heard that you are trying to help us serve that business." You all, whether it's an independent, a D or an R, everyone is all looking about the need to get some reform around this issue. So I often tell people when they say, "We need your help," I tell them, "You already have my help. I'm already in your side of the equation. What I need your help is to talk to your members of Congress. If we're going to get momentum, if we're going to get movement, you all need to seize the day and really talk to your congressional delegation." And again, I know some of you may have heard this joke before. Regulators are not known for wit and humor, so if you've heard it before, we're not expected to come up with new creativity. Let's make this more of a grassroots issue than it already is. Well, that really is. I think it's a grassroots issue. You may not, but anyway. So I'm encouraged to see people in the financial industry coming up to me, again, raising this issue unprompted. It means, again, that they're understanding the stakes with greater clarity. That's encouraging because, as I said, the situation as it now stands is untenable. It's unsafe because it means that many cannabis businesses are limited to conducting their transactions in cash, which makes them a target for criminal activity, including violence and money laundering. And it's unjust, because it means that we have a sizable industry, legal in 39 states and here in the District of Columbia, that is being unfairly marginalized and stigmatized in the marketplace. I often say that we are going to need to move beyond this prohibition era mindset. And it's also, quite frankly, incredibly short-sighted, because it means this multi-billion-dollar industry can't obtain the capital and financial services needed to grow, thrive, and flourish, which also means that state, local, and federal authorities are unable to realize potential tax revenues that they all so desperately need today. My only interest here today is that of a regulator. I have no particular stake in the legal marijuana industry. I'm not an investor, and for that matter, I'm not even a cannabis user. But as a regulator, I have to recognize reality. And that reality is that this industry is growing, is going to continue to grow. Helping these businesses to access legitimate financial services where they can perform electronic transactions, deposit funds, and secure reliable access to affordable credit will only help spur additional growth. We need to give them an on-ramp to help the mainstream financial services system during this time. And that, again, ladies and gentlemen, requires leadership. And again, to be honest, it's perhaps a little unusual for a financial regulator to be so vocal on an issue like this. Normally, we tend to defer to Congress on these issues and questions and focus on the statutes as they currently exist. However, there is a growing sense of urgency that something needs to be done. So that's why I've been happy to take what actions I can to do to help generate momentum and serve as a catalyst. For those of you in the industry, please recognize that you may not get all of the things that you're going to be asking for initially, but certainly it can address key needs like commercial lending and opening access to electronic payments in the industry. If we can just do that, we'll have made a significant step forward and set the stage for further normalization. I indeed see this as a tremendous opportunity. And again, I look forward to work with EMC and give you all my pledge that I'll be working in partnership with you and other stakeholders such as this group to really continue to get this across the finish line. We have a number of marginalized, underserved communities who are counting on all of our efforts to help give them the legitimacy that they need to safely provide access to affordable financial services. So in that vein, you all, thank you for allowing me to talk to you about why I care about this issue so passionately, why I do want to give you the clarity and the transparency that you need to move forward. And I look forward to maybe answering maybe one or two questions before you continue with today's program. Yes, sir.
I probably don't need a microphone. Okay. So you did mention a compendium that has been put together. Is that something that's available to the public? Like, could I go and find that, or is it only for members?
It's for our credit union examiners because I'm
Okay.
using that, you all, as a tool that we have for what we call our general supervision and examination procedures. So that's one of the things that we are holding on to. But again, it's just having our supervisors go through all of the state laws just to have that compendium readily available for our examiners so that they can really, as I mentioned, having them work in partnership with those credit unions. So I wish I could make that available. As also, I wish I could make the 202 credit unions that are working in this space as well available. So those are all things that are private for our agency at the time.
Okay. And I'd like to make an observation within the industry and love to hear your feedback on this. The 700 plus institutions that are servicing cannabis, according to FinCEN's reports, I think a lot of us who are in the space would say in actuality, the number that are actively soliciting cannabis business is probably a lot less than that. You know, I'm just curious if you found that as well, or what your opinion is.
It's a number of things. And when I use the data, I'm looking at the number of those who have filed the appropriate SARs and currency transaction reports. So that's how we're able to see. But then from our call report data, I can say with some relative certainty that our 202 credit unions are serving that business because we know it from the examinations. We know it from just looking at some of the other things that they're providing us through the call report. In fact, I'm very pleased to see there has been an uptick in the number of credit unions and, for that matter, banks that have also seen like an increase in SAR filing. So just because one has filed a filing doesn't mean that they are actively serving that space, but I certainly hope it means that they have an appetite and wanting to go deeper. If I may sort of deviate a bit, one of the things that put this as a passionate issue for me, I have taken on the whole issue of financial inclusion as the civil rights issue of our time. What I didn't mention in my remarks was that before becoming a part of financial services, I was destined to become an Episcopalian priest. So I spent a lot of time working as a missionary in Africa. I was in Zambia and Zimbabwe. And while I didn't quite go into ministry, I have yet worked in banking and financial services, wanting to serve vulnerable populations, wanting to serve folks who didn't have access to traditional credit. So I've always worked around economic and community development finance. And when I was recently talking about financial inclusion, I've often talked about underserved, differently able ethnic communities, rural and tribal. And then when someone came up to me from the cannabis business and said that cannabis business operators were also underserved and that they were treated as a marginalized community, that certainly registered with me. But then when I'm going around the country and hearing that some of these legitimate cannabis businesses are showing up to get mortgages, and their mortgages are being denied, not because of cash flow, not because of collateral, but because that particular financial institution said, we don't want to make a loan to someone who's in that business. So that's why I became more passionate about this. I look at this, to me, as a part of an outreach effort. And again, it's helping vulnerable communities have access. So that is what made me so passionate about this area. Yes, sir. And it's as if you cared what made me passionate about it. I just thought you need to know.
First of all, thank you for your comments. There's no doubt in my mind you would have been a phenomenal minister.
Thank you. I'm glad I can't blush.
Yeah. So one of the characteristics of cannabis businesses is they can be high volume. They can generate a lot of cash, move a lot of money. As you look particularly at the credit union space, um, kind of what I don't think of credit unions as being big business banks, although they certainly do have small business components. You know, how do you think credit unions should look at this as a business opportunity?
That's a really good question. How should they size the market? How should they recognize that they have an opportunity to serve this $25 billion industry, which we think is probably even more than that? That's just that we know about to date, and that's even without full legalization. Where first of all, our credit unions, many of them are serving business clients in today's environment. In fact, in the parlance of credit unions, it's called member business lending. So one of the things that they've done that I'm really proud of is that when you think about the PPP program that came into existence during the CARES Act, credit unions made over 300,000 PPP loans. Credit unions, many of them, not all of them are making business loans. I would say core products for credit unions have traditionally been auto loans, consumer finance, and many of them are making mortgage lending efforts. In fact, our credit union mortgage lending portfolio is over about $1.5 trillion. There is a sizable piece of that is in the commercial real estate market. Many of them have former commercial lenders that have come from Wall Street and Main Street firms. Many of them are working to provide, again, access to capital. Now, are the credit unions going to make multi-million-dollar loans? No, but they are going to be able to make loans that serve their member owners. Many of them are using small business SBA, Small Business Administration guarantees. I think in this particular segment, sir, they're also using a lot of USDA loan guarantees as well. So yes, we are providing a framework for credit unions to embrace this business, but again, not going into it chasing income and yield, but encouraging them to go into this, provided they're going to make that appropriate investment in compliance, that they are going to make sure they have the tools of the day to look at not only just Bank Secrecy Act, but to also knowing who the vendors are, knowing who the clients are. So it is critically important that all of those are followed, not just FinCEN, but following the money flow, back to what Kirsten was saying earlier, the 3 T's. So while I encourage credit unions to do this, I want them to make sure that they need to make sure that embracing any new business line, whether it's deciding to pursue cannabis business or any of the other business items, is it in alignment with your risk tolerance? Does it fit even the needs of your member owners and things of that nature? So it's not for the faint of heart, and it's also meant for people that you are going to pursue it. Make sure you're making those necessary investments in compliance. And as I also work with credit unions to get those that are embracing business lending, and to also make sure that they have all the other ancillary services that business clients need, not just the loan, but are you providing the lockbox and the treasury management and all those other services that it takes to really help that entrepreneur have access to continuous capital and things of that nature. So yes, we have 5,000 credit unions now. When I make the statement that I want them to be involved, I'm not saying all 5,000, but I'm saying that those who feel that they can invest in the infrastructure, that are going to have the appropriate compliance and the appropriate leaders, and that's either for this business or even for business lending, that we want them to be allowed to do this. So yes.
It sounds like it's not just banking the business, but it's banking business owners.
Exactly. And that gets back to the KYC and all those other things. So they need to make sure that they are equipped to do that. And again, and I wanted to move away from the prohibition era mindset. So I want us to work with them to make sure that we are assessing their needs and meeting their needs with affordable credit union and financial services products. And those that are doing it, again, to date, it's been primarily, as you know, in the deposit side and payment processing. There is something that I had very encouraging the other day when I heard that Visa, MasterCard, and some of those groups are now looking at some opportunities where they perhaps can play a role in this as well. But certainly for me as the regulator, it's not my goal to tell them what they can and cannot do. I just want to provide them with the regulatory framework and flexibility that they need. In fact, my regulatory philosophy is pretty simple. Regulation needs to be effective but not excessive. And provided that I'm not over-regulating their ability to serve their markets, then I want them to sort of do whatever their balance sheets allow and whatever the markets predict. I'm a free market capitalist at heart. Yes, sir.
As you think about the credit unions that have embarked on this journey, where do you think they could be doing better, especially if we're going to invite more credit unions in to serve this market?
I think one of the things that they could be doing a better job at is at least telling the story. I still think that there's this borderline recalcitrance and this borderline, ooh, gee, what are the people going to think if I talk about this readily and openly? So I still think you all that there's a fear, rightly or wrongly, that people are just not talking about this issue other than a few groups such as meetings like this. So that's one area. I think also there's probably this concern around regulatory clarity, around hearing regulators such as myself sort of let them know that, hey, provided you're following FinCEN, provided you're doing all these other things, our examiners are not going to play a game of gotcha, provided you can show BSA and KYC compliance. So I think it's just going to need to be more communication. As I mentioned earlier, one of the things I'd love to do is perhaps do an outreach event. So Kirsten, I don't know if all of the vendors were here today. I know I'm going to be at the reception tonight, but I meant what I said. I'd like to do some type of roundtable or some type of convening where I, one, invite you all as third-party vendors to meet with my examination team, because I want them to know that for those credit unions that are working in this space, I want them to know that we have some very strong, robust third-party providers like you who are guiding them and who are fully aware of compliance. And then another piece of the puzzle, I'd like to do some type of convening with those 202 plus credit unions to let them also hear from you directly, because something tells me not all of them know about the role that you all are playing. So I'm one, as Kirsten may have said earlier, I believe in bringing people together and building, like, I guess, ties for communication. So I think things like this and other events like that, sir, will go a long way. I think we have time for one more. I don't want to sort of be the invited guest who doesn't leave the podium.
Hopefully this will be a simple or quick one. You'll be able to take another. Thanks for bringing up the idea of the examiners, and appreciate all that they're trying to do around the FinCEN, AML, BSA, and all the other sort of acronyms that are really important from an examination perspective. Is the NCUA actually looking at creating more guidance for examiners and for the credit unions themselves? And I'd ask the same question of the ABA as well, around deposit concentration, about risk management of the lending portfolio that may be tiered towards to cannabis, capital ratios and the like. Is there anything specific that you say to your credit unions about that if they're serving cannabis?
You know what? That's a really good question. You all, when we look at our credit unions, when we go there to do their examinations, we're looking at their risk overall. I would say that we believe in looking at concentration risk. We look at those who are heavily weighted toward one particular loan type and things of that nature. But that's only if we think it is just going to pose injurious to the safety and soundness of not only that institution, but to also our share insurance fund. As I mentioned, we insure deposits up to $250,000 per account, just as our banking peers do. But we would not say that there's going to be one particular product that we need to be mindful of, because then I think that creates this, oh, gee, we're so afraid. So no, we're just going to have risk limits. We have tolerance levels, but we would not single out one. I don't want to say cannabis loan concentrations to be any different than the other thing. You need to make sure that you're mitigating the risk. And again, risk mitigation and not risk avoidance. And right now, because I'm seeing more of the credit union engagement, more on the cash piece, the deposit taking, I don't even think we've begun to even see it rising to the level of a loan area. But when that day does come, we would just give the general guidance that we give now, looking at any type of concentration, whether it be in your ag lending or in your name a typical product type. But no, nothing of that nature to date, just because and when we do see more movement afoot, again, that's up to the credit union and their boards to determine what is the appropriate concentration. In fact, I have credit unions that are in some parts of the country that are in agricultural communities where they may have 50% of their loan activity may be in agricultural loans, but they've demonstrated an ability to mitigate the risk. These loans are appropriately collateralized. So again, that's when we want to rely on their judgment and expertise to address market issues and issues regarding their particular credit unions. I'm one of these folks that doesn't believe that people from Washington can fly in and say, hey, we have all the answers. I believe in letting a lot of the credit unions across the country sort of, again, mitigate risk, serve their members. And when we get involved, it's because we are looking at some of the big picture things, but I just don't want to micromanage. And I certainly don't want to provide fear, which could happen if we go and said, oh, well, we're going to make sure that your cannabis lending is only going to remain at a certain level. Well, you know what? They may have the balance sheet and the tolerance for a much higher level. And by the way, and Sarah, going back to your question regarding the business piece, I just thought of that around business lending. Our credit unions are also able to do loan syndications and loan participations. So that is another area that credit unions, if they find that they are being weighted towards a particular loan product, they are able to sort of share those loans and sell portions of the loans in our system. Some of that of the other financial services providers as well. One more, is that it? I will be at the reception. Okay, thank you.